Daryl Dixon has had quite the journey on the show, from being a character who was just created for the show to a man who stood in the leading role. There's a lot of reasons why people love Daryl other than he's cool and badass, but because of how cool and badass he is, I figured I'd go over the surface level reasons why people fell in love with Daryl before I get into his actual character development. The easiest reason why people love him so much is because he uses a crossbow. In the earlier seasons, and even still to this day, each character introduced in the show has their own unique weapon. This is a way to easier differentiate the characters and even give them some personality and insight to their own personalities. Rick has his Colt Python, Michonne her katana, Negan has Lucille, and Daryl has his crossbow. Sure, characters use other weapons, but in the beginning seasons, everyone used guns except for Daryl. It made everyone think he was so smart because bullets are so finite and it would allow a stealthier approach, and that's correct, but Daryl seems to have an endless supply of crossbow bolts and doesn't really make a whole lot of them, but that's besides the point. Daryl's also very easy to love because he's the classic character who doesn't let a lot of people into his life. He's the tough exterior with a heart of gold, which is a really common trope when it comes to all shows really, but Daryl has surpassed just being a trope to levels of stardom where I'm sure if you look up the characters with tough exteriors but hearts of gold in the dictionary, Daryl's the first one that pops up. Daryl's the classic lone wolf archetype, but he's very clearly not a lone wolf. And that's where the character of Daryl Dixon differentiates himself from all other characters with tough exteriors. Daryl cares deeply about the people he does let into his life. And yeah, a lot of these other characters eventually learn to let people in their life and let love in, but that's their character arc. This is not Daryl's character arc. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over Daryl's entire character arc from start to finish, the major events that changed him, and how Daryl Dixon became the heart of The Walking Dead. When Daryl's introduced in the show, he's not a very likable character. He's the brother of Merle, who was an extremely unlikable character, and he seems to be the type of person that you wouldn't want around in a zombie apocalypse. He's the selfish, shoot you in the leg to get away from a horde type of person. Oh wait, no, that's Shane. The very first scene he's introduced in, he picks a fight with Rick Grimes, which is a far cry from where they would eventually be. In the first season, Daryl actually isn't much of a factor. He's more of a glorified background character, and this was mainly due to the fact that he was a character written specifically for the show. He's got a few scenes that show us who he is, but nothing that really gives him any development of any kind. Come on! Daryl's first real character development comes in Season 2, and that development is something that really paves the way for his entire character arc going forward, and that's Carol. He spends the first half of Season 2 looking for Carol's daughter Sophia. Sure, he's strange and gross at times.
What the hell happened? Look, he's wearing ears.
But he cares about Carol, so much in fact that he's really the only one who's actively looking for Sophia. When it's revealed that Sophia was actually in the barn, Daryl is the one to comfort Carol and stop her from running towards her. While Daryl doesn't often speak his own feelings into words, he paints his feelings through actions, and this is never more clear than from this scene. This is also the first hint as to how Daryl was going to develop as a character, and it's all about who he chooses to let into his life. The next character we see Daryl form an attachment to is Beth at the prison. While there's certainly a contingency of people who see this relationship as romantic, I certainly don't, at least not with the scenes that we got of them together anyways. I wouldn't go as far as to say Daryl is to Joel as Beth is to Ellie, but it's certainly like an overprotective brother watching over his little sister. Season 3 is really when Daryl begins to shine as a character, through forming relationships with other characters and through his own actions. When Judith is born and Rick is having a bit of an episode, Daryl is the one to hold everyone together in his own way. He calls Judith little ass kicker, making everybody laugh in a time where they felt like they had no leader. While Daryl is not Rick Grimes and he would never go on to be, Daryl started becoming a leader in his own right. Merle is also brought back as a form to develop Daryl's character even further. Though Merle is Daryl's own brother and family, his actions go directly against what Daryl has slowly been developing into, and this forces Daryl to see that the group has become his true family. Daryl's mindset even forces a switch onto Merle, who eventually sees eye to eye with not only Daryl, but the rest of our group, and dies both tragically and heroically. Daryl is then forced to put down his own brother, and while they've had their differences in the past, Daryl was looking forward to life with his own family, the group, and his brother, but this was taken away from him. In season 4, this truly was when Daryl started becoming the star of the show. If Daryl Dies, We Riot was in full effect, and Daryl was given more of the badass action scenes of the show, such as, single-handedly taking out a tank, no big deal. Not only did the audience love Daryl, but he was dependable to everyone around him. He became Rick's right-hand man, a genuine friend to Carol, who, again, some people saw as romantic, but I don't, and if Beth is Daryl's little sister, Carol is Daryl's big sister. And that's as simple as I can put it. At this point in the show, Daryl's character proved valuable and exciting enough to give him his own storylines, such as being on the road with Beth and keeping her safe, as well as afterwards when we meet the Claimers. Daryl's unsure if the rest of the group is even alive, and he's forced to be on his own. He takes on the ideals of the Claimers, seeing this as an easy way forward, until he's met face to face with Rick once again, and all of that goes out the window. Daryl stands up for Rick, Michonne, and Carl, ultimately leading for them to take out the Claimers once and for all. Daryl is very clearly overjoyed to see Rick once again, and Rick calls Daryl his brother, which is a far cry from how they were first introduced to each other. From here on comes season 5 and the start of the Terminus arc. Daryl is now almost as synonymous with The Walking Dead as Rick Grimes is. I mean, just look at this promotional photo for season 5, and there's more too. Daryl was by far the most popular character in The Walking Dead, even more so than Rick was. For the first several episodes of season 5, Daryl becomes Rick's full-on right-hand man, and this is a trend we would continue to see for quite some time. Whatever Rick's plan is, Daryl's always right there to back him up. When Rick wants to go back into Terminus to kill the remaining termites, everyone is kinda against the idea, so Rick looks at Daryl like, come on dude, are you at least with me? The only thing that stops this from happening is Carol, once again showing us how important she is to Daryl. Daryl's luck doesn't seem to increase very much, as he and Carol find a lead to where Beth has been taken, follow it only for her to be killed right as Daryl reunites with her, leading to some instant revenge and even more heartbreak. When they arrive at Alexandria, Daryl has much more trouble settling in than the others do. He knows that this place isn't going to last the way that it is, and stands by Rick at that assessment, but he also feels much more comfortable out in the open world, landing him his job with Aaron as an Alexandria recruiter. And who do they find on this expedition? The one and only Morgan. When season 6 rolls around, Daryl gets even more badass scenes and standalone episodes. He meets Dwight and Sherry, which is the start to a whole new character arc for Daryl, but that comes a bit later. Daryl blows up the Savior blockade with an RPG and then fires it again into the lake to take out a majority of the horde of walkers. Though Daryl, I really think a lighter or even a match would have worked the same, but it was cool nonetheless. When the fight against the Saviors begins, Daryl is the one again side by side with Rick, following through on Rick's plans because he knows whatever Rick's thinking is probably the right idea, until the one time that it isn't and it lands them in a world of trouble. In season 7, Daryl's forced to deal with the fact that it's his fault he got Glenn killed, and while being a prisoner of Negan, forced to eat dog food and listen to the same song on repeat for days, it doesn't break Daryl, and he's forever still loyal to Rick Grimes, eventually breaking out and giving Rick the courage to fight back. While I initially thought that it would have been more interesting to see Daryl take on Eugene's role in season 7 and 8, acting as a double agent for Rick, it would have been entirely out of Daryl's character. Throughout all the pain he's endured, he's still loyal to Rick and his true family, and them alone. For season 8, Daryl shows no mercy for the Saviors whatsoever, partly because they're at war, but also because Daryl has a very personal vendetta against the Saviors himself.
That was...
I know who it was. Don't matter. Not one little bit.
So much so that when they beat them at the end of season 8, it doesn't end there. Daryl, for what feels like the first time in the show, goes against Rick in the beginning of season 9. He agrees with Maggie that Negan has to die for all of this to be over, going as far as to lure Rick away from the camp so that way Maggie can carry out the deed. though this couldn't have come at a worse moment. A horde of walkers stumbles upon them, of course they do, leaving Rick gravely injured. When Rick dies on the bridge, Daryl's the one to stay by his side. He knows it's the last time he's gonna see him, and rather than try to save a doomed man, he spends every last second he can by his side, symbolically passing the torch to Daryl as the show's new leading man. But while Daryl leads the show, he doesn't just become Rick Grimes. He's not the leader that Rick was, and the writers could have easily just transferred all of Rick's roles to Daryl, written in a storyline that made Daryl the new leader of all the communities, but that's not who Daryl is. Daryl leads in his own way, the way that he always has, to the people within the show and the people watching it. Throughout the rest of Season 9, Daryl struggles with life after Rick. When they face against the Whisperers, Daryl doesn't have all the answers the same way Rick would've. This leads to completely different circumstances in a Rickless group, and the Whisperers gain the upper hand time and time again. But with this war against the Whisperers comes another side of Daryl, a softer, more parental side to both Lydia and Judith. Daryl sees what Alpha has put Lydia through, and goes to bat for her time and time again. Because Rick is gone, he becomes Uncle Daryl to Judith, who looks after her the best way that he can, the same way he's always done. And with Season 9 comes another character that would change Daryl, and that would be Connie. Once again, a lot of people think this friendship should have been romantic, and no, I actually agree. Daryl becomes close with Connie, going as far as to learn sign language so that way he can communicate with her, and this leads to a lot of great scenes between them trying to communicate. In Season 10, the show had been completely transferred to Daryl as the show's new lead. Season 9 still had 5 episodes with Rick in them, so Daryl took the back seat even though he was the main character for the majority of the time, but with Season 10, that all changed. Everything that started in Season 9 is enhanced in Season 10. Uncle Daryl, his relationship with Connie, his leadership in his own regard, and for the first time in the show, even an actual relationship. And it's not with Connie. In Season 11, this relationship is delved even further with the introduction to the Reapers. It seems that Daryl learned a thing or two about being held prisoner in Season 7, and this time he decides to fully blend in, pretending to be one of the Reapers instead of going against them. But as we all know, Daryl's true to his own family, regardless of who stands in the way, so he leaves Leah to be reunited with his family, and then a whole new problem arises: the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth arc is when the Uncle Daryl storyline comes into full effect. He's now solely responsible for watching over Judith and RJ now that Rick is dead.
Ryan, who was supposed to be dead?
And Michonne has left them for some strange reason. He doesn't know because Judith doesn't tell him. He has to become a father figure and doesn't quite know if he's doing a good job with it, but Carol's there to reassure him that he is. Daryl does his best to blend in and become part of the Commonwealth, but the one aspect about Daryl that never changes is his loyalty to his family. So when the Commonwealth puts his family in danger, he goes against them. This all comes to a head in the series finale, where Daryl's the one to stand against Pamela Milton, telling her what she's doing is wrong because they ain't the Walking Dead, a callback to what he told Rick back in Season 5. But in the finale, Daryl learns that Rick isn't truly gone, and that's where Michonne left to go to, so he goes out after them, riding into the sunset, trying to find Rick Grimes. To me, Daryl's character arc is far from over. He's got his own spin-off coming that takes place in France for some strange reason we don't know yet, and I'm sure that a show completely about Daryl is going to give his character layers of depth that we never even saw in The Walking Dead, even when he was the show's main character. Though Daryl becomes the lead and fills Rick's shoes, his character doesn't just change into Rick. He's still the same tough exterior that everyone loves, and even when he goes and does his own thing, he's still the heart of the show. There's a reason why everybody says if Daryl dies, we riot. There's a reason why he became the new lead of the show, and it has far more to do than Carl dying or Norman Reedus getting a big contract. Daryl was always the beating heart of the show, in some ways even more than Rick was. He's the natural replacement to be the leading role for Rick, even if Carl or Glenn or anyone was still in the show. He cares deeply for everybody around him, but doesn't always let everybody in. The characters that he does let in, as an audience, we learn to love them too. It's for all these reasons and the journey that he's had that Daryl Dixon is the heart of The Walking Dead. What are your thoughts on Daryl, and what are your expectations for his spin-off? I've got a video about my expectations and wants for the spin-off coming down the road, and if I missed something, make sure to leave a comment down below about what I missed, and if you enjoyed, remember to leave a like, I'd greatly appreciate it, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you do, then I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.